everybody. My name is Kaylee Zazula, and I am the program manager for Travis Audubon. It's nice to see so many people here tonight to learn about prairie chicken conservation, a really cool topic. So I'm going to start out with just a couple of announcements before we get to what you came here for. First of all, I want to congratulate Jennifer and Valerie Bristol on winning this year's birding brawl. They saw 113 species, which is incredible. And I also want to say an excellent job to their competitors, Rich Kostecki and Romy Swanson, who saw 97 species, which is nothing to balk at. That's quite an incredible number for one day. So shout out to all four of them for doing such a good job on their big birding days. And if you want to support them, it's not too late. You are still welcome to donate to their fundraising pages. And Birdathon 2024 is well underway. And we are actually at almost 80% of our goal, which is really exciting. We want to get to 100%, and you have helped us get so far already. So if you have not participated in Birdathon yet and you want to, there are still spots available for many of our upcoming events. You are able to sign up your own team. And then we have the photography contest. So I will include the link to learning more about Birdathon in the chat box in just a moment, but we would love to get your support. It's been a really fun year, and spring migration is well underway. So this is just an awesome time to take advantage of all of the trips that we have happening. Next week on Thursday, I believe we have a Wingspan game night. So for those of you who enjoy playing Wingspan, this is a great opportunity to play with fellow birders. So you can check out our calendar. I mean, you can register that way. We would love to have you there. It's just in the evening at the Travis Audubon office. So that will be Thursday of next week. Another fun event coming up in May is the World Migratory Bird Day event at Hornsby Bend. So we're going to be just enjoying birds and migration all day. There will be several bird surveys. There will be beginner bird walks. There's going to be a social hour. And then there's also a volunteer project if you want to help out with just some maintenance work at Hornsby Bend. So you can learn more about that on our website as well. I hope that you will make it. And then last but not least, our next meeting is going to be our business meeting as well. So just keep that in mind. We hope to see y'all there. Even if you are not a current member, you're still welcome to attend the business meeting and just hear a little bit about what's going on with Travis Audubon. And our new executive director, Mashariki Cannon, will be at that meeting. So that's a great opportunity to hear from her and meet her. So we hope to see you all at that meeting. It's going to be in person on the third Thursday in May. All right, that's all I have to say. So I'm going to kick it off to Anne-Marie Reed, who is going to be introducing our presenter.
Yeah, hi. We're really excited that Kyle's here and tell you a little bit about him. He is the Recovery Program Coordinator for the Attwater Prairie Chicken Program at the Houston Zoo. He's been with the program for 3 years. He is originally from Maine, where he did his undergrad and master birder, it just comes naturally. Master program at the University of Maine. And then after working in higher education for several years, he returned to his studies for a second master's in zoo conservation biology at the University of Plymouth in England. He did research on thermoregulatory behaviors of birds, and before joining the Houston Zoo, he worked at the Mystic Aquarium with the African penguin team. So we're really excited to hear what he knows and what he can tell us about the chickens.
Awesome. So hello, everybody. My name is Kyle. As Anne-Marie said, thank you for the introduction. I am going to quickly, I do have a slideshow that I will pull up. So let me just pull that up really quickly. Let's see. Am I able to share my screen?
Yes, you should be able to share your screen.
Let's see if I can find it.
Do we need to make him co-host, Kelly?
I don't think so, but we can go ahead and do that.
Okay, you should be a co-host, so you should be able to share it now.
All right. Let me see. There it is. All right. All right. Are you all able to see my screen?
I'm not able to see it yet. All I'll see is your name.
How about now?
There we go. Now we can see it.
Perfect. All right. Let's see if we can get this. There we go. All right. So as you said, my name is Kyle. I am the recovery program coordinator for the Houston Zoo's Attwater Prairie Chicken program. I've been with the zoo now for about 3 years, so this is coming up in my third season. And today I'm excited to talk to you a little bit about the prairie chicken program we have and the recovery program as a whole, just talking a little bit more about their conservation and the efforts that are going into that. So I think first we have to really open up by thinking about what is a prairie chicken. So when you're thinking about chickens, the name chicken is kind of deceiving because many of you are probably thinking of a domestic chicken, such as the four that you might see over here. And so domestic chickens are actually descendants of four jungle fowl species that are from Southeast Asia. The prairie chicken, however, is a grouse species, and though they are in the pheasant family, they're not actually a chicken in the sense that you may think of the word chicken. So the name can be a little bit deceiving. So the Attwater prairie chicken is actually a subspecies of the greater prairie chicken. What that means is the APC, I'm going to say APC as a short name for the Attwater prairie chicken. So if you hear me say that, that's what I'm referring to. So the APC population is genetically distinct from the greater prairie chicken, but it's not actually different enough to be considered a separate species from the greater prairie chicken. So on the side here, you'll see a map of the greater prairie chicken's historic range in the green. That's all with the lines through it. And then those little blue pockets you see is actually their current range. So as you can see over the years, their habitat and their range has really shrunk. So it's considerably constricted from the years and years that they've been populating this. And for the greater prairie chicken, there's been 3 species or subspecies that have kind of broken out from this, one of them being the Attwaters. But I want to take a second to talk about the heath hen, which is a subspecies that's found along the East Coast, or was found along the East Coast. So the heath hen, this species was found along the East Coast and went extinct in 1932. This is an important species that I wanted to highlight because it has a lot of parallels to the Attwater prairie chicken. So in 1791, legislation was proposed to save the heath hen after we noticed a decline in their population. So if you actually think about this, that's kind of crazy because we've been trying to save this greater prairie chicken for over 230 years. So we've had legislation that long ago that started the act to save these birds. In 1907, there were only about 77 of the heath hens remaining, and they were located on Martha's Vineyard on the East Coast. This same year in 1907, they made a 16-acre reserve to protect the heath hen, and it rebounded in 9 years to about 2,000 birds. Unfortunately, this effort was short-lived as a wildfire decimated the population, and the heath hen actually went extinct in 1932. So because of this extinction, I think it's really important to highlight because it brought a lot of attention to the Attwater Prairie Chicken, and the Attwater Prairie Chicken has kind of been dubbed the heath hen of the South. This led to some of the first scientific studies on the Attwater Prairie Chicken, with the first being in 1939. This also began when the enforcement of historic sport hunting law enforcement started, and the Texas Game and Oyster Committee was very understaffed at the time, but they were really trying to enforce the hunting of the Attwater Prairie Chicken. So kind of back to the question, what is an Attwater Prairie Chickens? So this is a species of grouse that is a Texas native, and was formerly found in Louisiana as well, but went extinct there in 1919. So this species actually still has a home here in Texas and only in Texas, but it's critically endangered with only about 200 of them being left in the wild. And it was put on the U.S. Endangered Species Act in 1967. So it's been declining for quite some time. So I just want to kind of give you a show of what the Attwater Prairie Chicken looks like. So I have three distinct pictures here. So I want to start by saying the adult female all the way on the right, this is traditionally what you're going to see when you see a Attwater Prairie Chicken. And now I say that because most of the year, the adult males look like this as well. And it's actually very hard to tell the females from the males apart throughout the year. The male that you're seeing over here in the middle is actually only when they are in their breeding season. So about the end of February, let's say, through maybe June. We have one bird that goes until July. They'll have this yellow plumage come in, and that's part of their mating display, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a little bit. And then all the way over here on the left is what they look like as chicks. They really do look, kind of like the traditional chick that you might think of when you think of a traditional chicken. But I think it's just important to put those into context as you go through this presentation. So timeline. So I've mentioned breeding season, and I want to give you a full sense of what a typical year looks like for our Attwater Prairie Chickens. So in later February and March is typically when we see the males begin to boom. So in the wild, these are a bird. This is a lekking species, which means they congregate together in large flocks and display for the females. Historically, it's been reported that up to 200 males can show up in a lek and display. Obviously, today we don't have that same privilege because we only have about 200 total in the wild. So typically what we'll see is the male will be displaying in an open field, and the females will be on the taller grasses around the periphery of that field. And once a male attracts a female, typically the female will come in and grab it. They'll go off and they'll copulate, and the hen will go and lay her eggs. These birds do not stay together, and the female actually handles all the incubation and rearing of the chicks by herself. It's still not uncommon for a female to select multiple males during a season to increase the genetic diversity of her clutch of eggs. So in around March / late April is when we typically start seeing our eggs. So for people who celebrate Easter, that's typically when we'll start seeing eggs. So I like to joke that we have our own Easter egg hunt each season. Looking for these eggs. They hide them very well under tall clumps of grass. Typically, we'll see about 12 to 20 eggs per clutch from each hen. And what they'll do is they'll lay about an egg a day until they feel like they've completed their clutch, and then they'll start sitting. From the time they start sitting, it's about 26 days until the chicks start to hatch out. Now, these are seasonal breeders, so the birds don't really nest outside the March to May window, which, as you can imagine, doesn't lend itself well to these birds when they're particularly vulnerable to changes in the climate, natural disasters, things like that coming on. And so if we get, for say, a hurricane around their breeding season, it can actually come in and wipe out, a good portion of the chicks for the season. And if it falls kind of outside that window, those birds won't breed again until the following year. And so right now what we're seeing is we only have 2 locations which we have prairie chickens. And so if both of those are hit, we're kind of out of luck for a year. So there's a need to expand our land and space for these birds just to prevent those natural disasters from really stunting the growth of the population. So in early May, even late April of this year, we have some hatching out at the end of this month. We typically see our first chicks start to hatch out, and in the wild, they'll be raised by the hen alone. But these chicks grow up really fast. They're usually fully sized as we come into July and August. Usually about 60 days is when you're starting to see that they're at release size for us. So when we'll actually put them back out onto the refuge, or when they're about adult size. They'll grow a little bit more, but they typically have their plumage in, they've molted their chick feathers, and they look like adults. So now the prairie chickens are endangered, but that's also because the biome that they reside in is one of the most endangered biomes in the world. The Texas coastal biome only has 1% of its biome remaining. A big piece of this is the functional extinction of the bison, the plains bison, which used to extend all the way down from Alaska and graze the plains, keeping them from becoming wooded. Now I say functional because there really is only a small population in northern Canada / Alaska left, but without the bison, the grassy plains have become a more wooded area, and we've lost a lot of biodiversity. So they're not what they used to be, and that means that the range in which the greater prairie chicken and the Attwater prairie chicken and other prairie chickens, have been able to reside in. And over here on the right is the range in which the bison would range and graze on that prairie grass. And now when we match it up with where the greater prairie chicken resides, you can see there's a large overlap between those two. And so with the functional extinction of the plains bison, we really have seen a decrease in habitat that they're able to live in successfully. And now I'm not going to talk a lot about it, but there's some historical context as well. So as you can imagine, here in Texas, we also had a lot of booming in the agriculture industry. So rice was a really big crop here. And so that took a lot of habitat away, as well as the oil industry. So, the early 1900s was not a great time for the prairie chickens biome. Another attributing factor to this biome being endangered is the introduction of invasives. And 2 big ones that I really want to highlight that impact the Attwater prairie chicken specifically are the tallow tree and fire ants. So for those of you who don't know, the tallow tree was imported from China and brought in as an experimental crop because they thought it could produce oil from the beans. When it was discovered that it was not a good crop, it grew in popularity due to the colors. We don't get that nice fall foliage that a lot of other places do. And these trees do kind of get the reddish leaves as the fall rolls around. However, this tree is very toxic to almost everything. And these trees took over the coastal prairie, really down here in Texas, quite substantially. For those of you who have been to the Houston area, if you drive down 45, which is one of our main highways, you'll notice that along 45, there is a ton of this. And you can really kind of see how much it's taken over our space. The other big one was the species of the Brazilian red fire ant. So they arrived in Texas in the 1950s, and they really had an impact on the bug population in the Texas coastal prairie. So when we're looking at how it directly applies to the Attwaters, studies from U.S. Fish and Wildlife have shown that while the fire ant is not the direct cause of, hurting the chicks. A lot of people think that the ants would attack the chicks. They actually don't do that. They have, but not traditionally. What the real issue is that they're attacking the other bugs, which is causing a decline in foraging opportunities for the chicks, meaning that they're not getting the substances they need or the protein they need when they're young. So this causes a lot of chick failure and a lot of mortality in chicks because they're not able to feed as they should. Now I want to talk a little bit about the recovery team history because this is a big piece of who I work with and the recovery program as a whole. So the Houston Zoo isn't the only one that's involved with this. So this branches all the way back. So when the U.S. Endangered Species Act was started, there are several things that a species has to do to qualify for it on the endangered species list. And one of these is creating a recovery team. So one of the goals of the recovery team is to help protect the habitat. So to accomplish this in 1972, the APC National Wildlife Refuge was created in Eagle Lake, Texas to safeguard the habitat of what was remaining of the habitat. And this reserve is 10,500 acres about, and this is a huge reserve. And now if you think back to the Heath End, the reserve that was created to help them rebound was only 16 acres, and they rebounded to 2,000 birds in just 9 years. So with just 16 acres, they were able to do that. We're hoping that a 10,000 acre reserve is going to help this population really bounce back and give them the space they need to, dig their way out of where they're at. In 1993, the captive breeding program began here in Texas with Texas A&M and Fossil Rim. They were the first two institutions to start captively rearing the Attwater Prairie Chicken and releasing them. And the Houston Zoo joined in 1994, just a year later. So when this breeding program started up, it was predicted that without human help, by the year 2000, the Attwater Prairie Chicken would have gone extinct without any conservation effort. Now today, the captive breeding program includes Fossil Rim, Caldwell Zoo, Houston Zoo, and the Sutton Center in Oklahoma. Now, it's interesting because even after all of these years, the husbandry of grouse has not been historically worked out well. Grouse have not been commonly kept in captivity, and really this didn't begin until about 1993, and this is because grouse are traditionally a really nervous bird and need a lot of open space and careful design enclosures so they don't hurt themselves when they flight. And for those of you who are familiar with grouse, a lot of the time they'll kind of panic and they'll fly straight up. And as you can imagine, in captivity, that can cause a lot of damage. So we have to put a lot of measures in place with netting and stuff like that to make sure that they're not going to hurt themselves in a captive breeding program. So knowing this and looking where our program was at the time, we knew we were challenged. And up until this point, we had been raising all of our birds at the zoo. And as you can imagine, the zoo is not always the most quiet place in Houston. We're right in the middle of the city. We're right next to some major hospitals, so we have some helicopters that fly overhead, and nor is there a plethora of open space that we can hold a large number of birds. We're located right in the middle of a large park, so space expansion is limited, and the space that we have at the zoo, we really like to make sure we're allocating appropriately to animals. Luckily for us, in 2005, we forged a partnership with NASA Johnson Space Center, who offered us a place on grounds to breed and raise our birds. And of course, we jumped at this opportunity as the plot of land is located on a prairie, which has the natural prairie grasses that they would be released onto. It's going to be quieter for our birds, and it allowed us to create large enclosures that we could house the birds, meaning ultimately better welfare for the birds. Since our facility has continued to grow, we currently have 24 large pens that we use in our breeding facility, and we recently added a new chick facility in 2020 to help with hand rearing of chicks and other rearing methods. So that's a little bit on the background of the program and kind of the history of the Attwater Prairie Chicken. That kind of takes us to where we are today. and looking at new strategies for release survivability of these birds, seeing as they are so endangered, and we want to make sure that we're producing really great birds. So we had an old strategy. So when we first entered the program, all the institutions really started by hand rearing. So every time a egg was laid, we would collect the eggs from all of the hens, bring them back to the zoo, put them in our artificial incubators, and hatch them out that way. We raised all of our chicks by hand, and the idea was let's get as many birds as possible out onto the refuge. So if we're releasing more birds into the wild, it would result in a greater and faster population growth and a faster recovery of the species. And in theory, that sounds really great. Hand rearing is very tedious, so it does take a lot of work and a lot of staffing and a lot of resources. We're also going to be producing a lot more eggs because, as you can imagine, as we're pulling eggs, females are going to have to keep laying. They're going to reclutch. We're going to get double clutches, maybe even a triple clutch. So we were getting up to 500, 600 eggs a season, which is a lot. But we started to shift how we thought about raising these birds, and we started to think about, do we want to just put a large quantity of these birds out onto the refuge, or do we want to start thinking about maybe we want to release a lower number of birds, but birds that are better able to survive when they're out there? So we kind of made this mentality shift from quality of the bird is better than the quantity of the birds that we're putting out. And this was really big, and a big shift in our mentality came when 2020, when COVID hit. And now COVID doesn't bring a lot of great things, but one of the things it allowed us to do is really critically look at our program and what we were doing to raise these birds and how could we better support the program and produce quality birds. Now, we hand raised all our birds before, and what we noticed is that when you hand raise birds, we're obviously not birds. So, teaching a chick how to be a bird is not something that we're going to be able to do. But what if we had other birds that would raise birds? Now, there was a lot of concern with letting the hens raise their own chicks, because if you let them raise their own chicks, we are in the middle of a prairie, so we have rats, snakes, things along that. We were worried about the mortality. There was a lot of concerns growing about that. But in 2020, we decided, let's be the first institution to try this. So Houston Zoo decided that year we would start by raising chicks on their own. So what we do now is we actually let the Attwaters lay them clutch, and they have minimal keeper contact. So right now I have about 12 pairs that are all laying, and some of the eggs, all the eggs will stay under them, and we'll actually let the hens naturally incubate those eggs for about 10 to 13 days. At 10 to 13 days, what we'll do is we'll actually pull those eggs back to make sure they're good. And I'll go into each of these a little bit more in depth. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. The other thing we did was domestic chickens. So we thought, we don't have the population or the space for all the prairie chickens to raise their own chicks. But what if we were able to get domestic chickens to sit on the eggs? They look pretty similar, and raise them as their own. We have a lot of domestic chickens that do a really good job raising their own chicks. What if we tried it with some Attwater Prairie chickens as well? So we started doing that. And of course, as I mentioned, the parent rearing. So I started talking a little bit about this, but our egg management, so our hens do sit on it for 10 to 13 days, and we kind of have a tier system. So after that 13 days, what we'll do is we will take the eggs back into the office, and we'll put dummies in the nests, and we'll candle them. What that is we're just shining a bright light through the egg to make sure that the eggs are fertile, and we will make sure they're developing and everything is good. And then we will replace about 8 to 10 of the eggs back under the hen. We'll then move on to see if we have any domestic chickens that have been sitting, and we'll put the rest of the eggs under them. And if we can't put them under the domestic chickens, we'll move them to our artificial incubator to finish out incubation and hand rear. So we developed a tier system for how we were handling the eggs. Now, along the way, we're logging every single egg, checking for fertility, and kind of watching it develop. And another thing we noticed is that weather impact on the eggs. So we've been really paying attention to the weather. Particularly where we are is susceptible to flooding with heavy rains. So, we have a rain event coming up on Sunday. So I spent a lot of time today gathering up the eggs and pulling them from the nest, replacing them with dummy eggs, and making sure that they were put into storage or incubators to make sure that they're safe from the rain. Last year, we didn't necessarily have a weather protocol in place, and a lot of our nests flood, and that means that the eggs would drown in it and we'd have to wait for them to reclutch. And so this year we're really taking a step forward to look at how we can make sure our survival of the eggs and hatchability is up. So we do have those domestic chickens as well. So we have a foster rearing strategy. We keep a flock of birdie hens on site with our APCs who act as the foster parents. So we let them live their lives as they normally would. When they start sitting in their little brooder boxes, we'll actually move them over to other enclosures, and they will get dummy eggs. And eventually we'll swap those eggs out for APC eggs about 2 or 3 days before they're due to hatch. And actually, emerging data from, I believe it was 2021, showed that these chicks had the best survival post-release that year. Now, that flopped a little with parent rearing this past year, but we're hoping to continue to track that data to see why that might be. And then we also started parent rearing chicks as well. So this idea is, hens who raise chicks hens should raise the chicks like they would once they're released. It gives them, parenting practice, and also allows us to see some of their natural behaviors. It also allows the chicks to be in some of the natural grasses that they would be in when they are going to be released onto the refuge. Now, what's really unique about our site at NASA is it is on the natural prairie grasses, and we do plant some vegetables in there as well to draw in some bugs, because we think this creates better foraging opportunities for the chicks. So not only are we going to be feeding them bugs, but also there's going to be bugs that they can forage on within the enclosure itself. The idea is that chicks are going to learn from the hen how to be a bird, something that we can't teach them. And also, these are going to be healthier, more robust birds. And over the past 3 years, we've really noticed that the birds that are produced by the parents and the domestic chickens do much better and have a much better survival when we're releasing them into the wild. So we think that we're onto something, and it's still too soon to kind of chart that data and do a real study, but we're collecting that data each year as we kind of follow them post-release. We have also kind of had a keeper focus eye in the past. So we used to do things that were more convenient for the keepers. So, bowls are easy to stack. It's easier to give them white bowls. It's, easier to clean. We had these plastic A-frames to protect the food from the rain. Obviously, when they're out on the refuge, they're not going to have these A-frames to protect them from the rain. And we used to use these blast sand in the front of our enclosures just to make it easier for cleaning. And we've since shifted our mentality to be more behavior focused. So we're giving them now trays and natural bowls that look like stuff they would traditionally see in the wild. So for example, this tray here is kind of that brown color to help blend in with the ground since they're going to be foraging. And so we'll move that tray around the enclosure to make sure they have to forage for their food and find it each day. Remove the blast sand and sandboxes. We know that when they're out on the refuge, they're not necessarily going to have that substrate. We are leaving it in some just to kind of give them a choice of substrate on their feet. And we've also had the opportunity to have some really awesome behavioral studies come in and examine the chick and adult birds to see how they can best mimic, their natural environment. One of the things we started to do is we noticed that they perched a lot. And that's not something we traditionally see at the refuge. And that's mostly because a lot of their perching is covered to protect them from birds of prey. But they are perching a lot. So we started doing kind of perching studies to see if that's maybe something that they naturally do. This past year, we actually have a doctoral student with us right now who's looking at the 3 different rearing methods and how that impacts the personality of the bird, if they're bolder or shyer or more nervous, and how that will impact their survival once they're released. So she did a preliminary study last year, and she's coming back this year to gather some more data and do another run of her study. So hopefully within the next 2 years, we'll be able to produce some published data on how these different rearing methods are impacting their abilities and a little spoiler, she did send me some preliminary data that the hand-reared chicks that we're hand rearing and also the ones that are raised the domestic chickens are a little bit more bold, which is really interesting and something that we might expect because they're more comfortable around people when we don't necessarily want them to be. And that's just because they're, habituating to it over a period of time of seeing us being the ones feeding them and whatnot. We've also started putting some fresh vegetation in. So, I mentioned before we started planting some vegetables inside the pens to create foraging opportunities for the adults to eat some of the greens, but also to draw in some bugs for the chicks. We're also partnering with our other offices, so our horticulture team provides us with foraging opportunities for chicks when they're really small by giving us sprout trays to kind of get them used to eating the greens. And we're also developing more natural looking tools. So this is an example of, a little stump we made out of epoxy to help kind of blend it in to what they might naturally see in the wild, but also something functional to help cover their food in the rain. So we're really moving away from this idea that we should be looking at what makes it easier for the keepers, but more of what is going to make this bird successful when it is released out onto the refuge. We also have just opened this new chick facility, which has allowed us more space for chicks. So this opened about 3 years ago, and we can now do hand rearing. This is also where we do a lot of our foster rearing. So these are the pens that our broody hens will kind of move into, and they'll stay there for like the first 10 days. They'll get more access from that. And there's actually grass pens around the whole exterior. So after a certain amount of time, they'll get access to the grass pens as well. So we can actually do the foster rearing on site now. We can also make sure we're getting the chicks onto the grass a little bit sooner. I just want to give a special thanks to all of our partners, so Fossil Rim, Wildlife Center, Caldwell Zoo, Sutton Center, Nature Conservancy, Texas Parks and Wildlife, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and our vet team. They do a lot for us, and we partner with them and work with them very regularly. And that is everything I have, but I want to open it up to questions.
If anyone has any questions, you can go ahead and put them in the chat. So it looks like the first question is, are you looking to explore partner lands? If yes, what makes for a suitable tract?
Yeah, so I'm not specifically involved with the expansion of partner lands, but I know we're talking with U.S. Fish and Wildlife now, and they are looking for more land to release the Attwater Prairie Chicken. They are looking for stuff with Texas coastal, and I believe it has to be a certain size as well for them. So they're the ones who are going to be reaching out. I believe they have something on their refuge website that has specifications. So if you want more information about that or know of a space, I would say they're probably the best resource to reach out to about private lands. The issue right now is that a lot of the Texas coastal prairie that we need to release these are privately owned properties. And so our task right now on the bigger scale is getting to these landowners before development companies do, so that they're not developed into, or I guess they don't destroy the habitat, and we can actually find more spaces to release these birds. So yeah, that is definitely something we're tackling right now, but I don't have the specifics on that, unfortunately.
Okay, the next question is, how easy is it for us to see these birds in the wild?
It is very difficult. So I would say if you want to see these birds in the wild, you would want to go to the wildlife refuge. They have a few different times of the year that you're probably going to have the best luck seeing them. One of them would probably be right now, while the males are booming. So while the males are booming, what they'll do is they have that yellow plumage. They also have these two air sacs on their neck that they'll inflate, and they'll make this booming noise, and they'll stomp their feet. So it's a really great site. They do a booming and blooming festival each year. And so that is a time when you're probably going to be able to see them the best. The other time you'll probably be able to see them is around release. So we release around September, August, September, maybe even late July, depending on the year. And the refuge was the place that we release most of our birds. And so if you go around that time of year, you're more likely to see the birds because they're getting the fresh release birds out there. But besides that, it's very, very hard. We had some wildlife friends come up to kind of tour our facility, and they went to the refuge and had no luck seeing them. Because they're only 200 and it's 10,000 acres, it's few and far between.
Next question. Oh, and I just wanted to jump in there. We did have a birdathon. It's already over, but we did have a birdathon to go see the prairie chicken. So keep your eyes peeled for next year. Great opportunity to see that. Someone asked, how many APC chicks are released each year?
So it depends on what the facilities produce. So our facility last year released about 50. Traditionally, we'll release probably closer to 100. We had a fewer breeding females last year. The other facilities probably release a little bit over 100. So I would say probably around 400 to 500 are released each year.
And then the next question, actually, I just have a question. So our numbers are increasing with that? Are you seeing
Yeah,
any?
so it's hard, right?
Steady?
So we have about 200. The challenge with the Attwater Prairie Chicken is that they're a prey species, and because we only have so many locations to release them, a lot of the birds of prey have kind of realized the time of year that the birds get released, and so they'll return. So we see a lot of caracara, owls, and other birds returning to kind of get a free meal from the influx of birds. And so I guess our hope with expanding sites is that we're able to kind of rotate around to give them a better chance of survival. Our numbers are increasing. We had the highest numbers this year of any previous year, I think in the past 30 years or something like that. So numbers are going up. They're just not going up as fast as we would like them to. And a lot of that has to do with just the space that we're able to release them and predators learning. So the refuge is working hard on predator mitigation, but at the end of the day, there is only so much that they're able to do.
And it's kind of maybe related to the next question was, what's the most rewarding part of working with these birds?
Gosh, I think getting to see the entire cycle. So I see the chicks from the day they're born into the day they're released. So it's really rewarding kind of to see them going into the wild and doing their thing. US Fish and Wildlife works with us. So they're banded when they're sent out. And so we can actually see and track some of our birds that have been with us 1 year and see how they're doing and if they're successfully producing chicks in the following years. And that's super rewarding in the sense that, you get to know a lot of these birds. They do have personalities like a lot of birds. And so being able to see them be successful and, help repopulate their population is definitely, I would say, the most rewarding piece.
Yeah, I mean, you're making a difference. That's pretty awesome. Okay, the next question. So when you grab eggs like you did today, will you keep them until they hatch or put them back out?
Yeah, so typically what we'll do is we will, I guess, a mix of both. So it depends on what the weather looks like. So this year, the plan is we'll pull them during the rain and then we'll move them back. Typically, we'll keep them under the hen as much as we can. We find that the eggs that are artificially incubated have more medical issues, and we're not quite sure why that is. Just small things like more curled toes, things that we can correct. But when they're under a hen or a domestic chicken, they don't come out with those issues quite as much. So we like to keep them under the hen as much as we can. Now, we do let them incubate with the hen for only about 13 days, which means it's only about half their incubation period. And then we're going to move them around to where we need them. So if they're with the hen, they'll go back under the hen. If they go under a domestic chicken after that, they'll go under domestic chicken. But if we don't have space for them, they will stay in our artificial incubators until hatch. So it really depends. Our goal is always to put them under the hen. They just do a much better job incubating than anything artificial could.
And this is a great question. What can we do to support conservation of these birds?
Yeah, I think a big thing is the Texas coastal prairie is so endangered and we're losing a lot of species. So I always tell people, something small you can do is help plant the natural, prairie seeds, in your backyard. If you have a backyard and you're lucky enough, they sell prairie seed mixes and they produce these beautiful flowers, some really great grasses. So I would say that's a small thing you can do is just, help spread that natural coastal prairie mix. Here in Texas, definitely go and support the wildlife refuge. They do a lot of work. They put on a lot of events. They're gearing back up. They took a hit during COVID, but they're starting to put on a lot of really great festivals. I know they do kind of a 5K if you're into kind of running and things like that along the refuge. They do Boomin' and Blooming events, which is a big festival they put on. So supporting them in any way you can as well. I would also say, if you know private landowners, talk to them about these birds. They're very, very in need of new homes, and have that person get in touch with U.S. Fish and Wildlife. They're always looking for new prospects of places that we could release them. But I think the biggest thing you need to do is just any sort of prairie restoration for these birds. The reason they're so endangered is they don't have habitat. And so restoring that habitat is going to be the big key in making these birds recover.
Do all of the centers that raise chicks follow your protocol, or does everyone try their own thing?
Yeah, so everybody does their own thing. Everybody started out hand rearing, and some of the facilities still strictly do hand rearing. We're all kind of starting to dabble in our own methodologies of what works best and what produces the best chicks. I believe it's Sutton Center has started using APC hens as foster parents. So they'll kind of cycle chicks through as they get older. So they'll put them with the hen for the first 10 days, and then they'll swap out those chicks once they reach day 10 and put in brand new chicks, and the hen won't even notice. So she'll raise those. So everybody has their own methodologies. We're trying to figure out what works best and what's producing the best, strongest chicks that are going to have the best chance of survival in the wild. I think we're the only one right now doing parent rearing or domestic chicken foster rearing. So hopefully, we'll start to develop methodologies and get some data behind what's working well. And, whether that's something another facility is doing or what we're doing, we'll be able to kind of share that information amongst ourselves.
Okay, someone asked, can you talk a little more about how domestic chickens and pheasants are related?
Sure. I'm not a genealogist by any means. So basically, all of them fall under the pheasant family. But from there, you have the grouse and you have the jungle fowl, which are two distinct groups that come from pheasants. So under the umbrella, they are both pheasants, but under that, they break off into two distinct lineages. So the chickens are from Southeast Asia, where the grouse are native to, the United States or the space in which they are. That better answers the question.
Okay. What's the current population at Attwater?
Sorry, could you repeat that one more time?
The question is, what is the current population at Attwater?
So the current population of the Attwater right now is around 200 birds. I believe that was the last census that was done. So I'd say roughly around 200, given that that was taken this past fall. And so right now it could be higher, seeing as we are in breeding season and we may have some chicks starting to hatch out. I know some facilities right now that hand rear have some chicks hatching out this season. Um, if you're including all of the captive population, then you're probably looking at around 350 birds included. But if we're looking at strictly the wild population, then you're looking at around 200 birds.
Well, it's not a lot. Um,
No.
I mean, you're doing good work. Um, when you release the foster hens and chicks, are they released into distinct territories or do they determine their own?
Nope. So on the refuge, they have different sites that they set up. So what we'll do is we'll bring them to the refuge, and they have, I want to say, like, we call them release pens. But what they are is they're just netted areas on the prairie that they stay in for about 2 weeks just to get used to their new environment. And then we will release them all out. And so whether they're foster reared, parent reared, or hand reared, depending on when our release group is set, they rotate along the pens. So, Sutton might go and fill up a few pens, and then we might go the next week and we'll fill up the next. So, in a way, it's random on where the reserve you're going to release them. But once they're out of that release pen, they can kind of go wherever they want on the refuge. We actually, a fun story, we had one that was raised by a domestic chicken this past year, and we were following it, and it vanished from the refuge for a little while. And what we found is a few weeks later, it turned up at somebody's farm, and it had found a flock of domestic chickens. And because it was raised by a domestic chicken, it had kind of taken up refuge on the outskirts of the farm and was hanging out with all the other chickens. So we're starting to see some of the implications of maybe what this cross species rearing might have when there are other, human settlements coming into their territory. So we
That's
always,
fascinating that they found that.
yeah,
That's pretty cool. Well,
right.
Someone says, I might have missed this, but does the horticulture department also put native prairie plants in the captive breeding spaces?
Yeah, so for us, we actually work with our Texas Master Naturalists group, and they come and they've really helped remove invasives and really get the grasses. So we do a lot of gamma grasses and switch grasses, which our birds love. Specifically, the gamma, they really like to nest under. So we do work with our horticulture team to grow some of those grasses and stuff like that so we can transplant it into our facility. But I would say the biggest part of the horticulture upkeep at our facility is due to our master naturalists and all the volunteers that come in and do some really great work. We used to have a really bad problem with deep-rooted sedge and nightshade, but they've really come in and helped us take care of that. So the grasses we do pay very close attention to, just because we want them to have as close to a natural prairie grass experience as we can get.
Love those master naturalists here too.
Oh, nice.
What does the facility, why does the facility mimic natural hiding places with man-made logs, etc.? Why not simply use what the prairie chicken would use in the wild?
So some of it is to make sure. So for the man-made log, for example, we give them a diet, and so we can't necessarily put their diet under the grass in heavy rains because it's going to get flooded and it's going to get wet, and then it creates mold and it attracts the ants. So we have to have some sort of device to keep the trays dry when we are getting really heavy rains, and we tend to get really heavy rains in May. So for us, it's more about making it look a little bit more naturalistic. We were trying to veer more away from the metal and the non-native looking devices, just because once they're out in the wild, we don't want them to get used to having those or be drawn to them if they, like perching on them, for example. We don't want them to be attracted to, human sculpted objects. We want them to kind of go towards things that they might see more naturally. Now at the refuge, there's obviously a lot more. There's like a forest around the outside and stuff like that. So they might see a log or something like that on the prairie here or there. So it's more of a a tool for us to kind of prevent them from being attracted to human created objects. And it's not so much that we don't want to use the more naturalistic things. It's just a practicality, I guess, a practical use of, I guess, our resources to make sure that they're not.
That makes sense. I mean, I guess it would be hard to find that big log that you had.
Yeah,
Anyway,
yeah.
you know, how long does an APC typically live?
Yeah, so in the wild, what you're looking at is probably around 2 to 3 years. Like I said, they are prey species, so they are very susceptible to a wide variety of predators. In captivity, they can live up to, let's say on the high end, maybe 8 years. I think we've had one live about 10 years, but typically you're going to probably see around 6 years in captivity, give or take.
Someone asked, do you ever put trackers on the birds?
Yeah, so when we release, we work with U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and we will do radio collars on some of them. Most of the time, we do our hens just so we can track them and see where they're nesting the following year, and that helps us get a count on how many birds are um, breeding the following year and raising their own chicks. So traditionally, what we'll do is we will follow most of the females. So traditionally, we'll put a radio collar on all of the females, and then some males. We also try to, with our 3 different rearing methods, we try to kind of spread that out as well so we can see the survivability of those different groups. So we definitely do track them post-release.
All right, we got one more question. Is there monitoring during the release pen period for predators?
Yeah, so they have a whole team that works the entire prairie chicken release. They have a number of interns as well. So they do a lot with um, predator tracking, predator avoidance. They do a lot with pest control. So they treat a lot for the fire ants that are down there. They used to be terrible at the refuge, and they've gotten them really under control, which has been really great. So they do a lot to make sure that the birds are being released into a, I would say safe, but as you know, the issue is that the refuge is completely surrounded by trees, and so the birds can easily track back into the trees. But any place there's perching, they put up those spikes so that no birds of prey can kind of sit out and wait and hunt the prairie chickens when they're released.
Yeah, that's got to be crushing after you've raised a chick and
You're
got
right.
hard to see it go immediately. All right, do we have any more questions?
I see just one more, which is have there been any APCs released at Commons Ford? I don't know if you would know the answer to that. Commons Ford is a place that's local to Austin.
I don't believe so. Our other release place is Goliad, and the only reason I say I don't think so is it could have been before my time. I don't know if they used to have different release sites, but as far as I'm aware, we only have 2 release sites, the Refuge and Goliad.
Thank you. Well, thanks.
Yeah,
Thank you to Anne Marie for helping facilitate Q&A, and a huge thank you to Kyle for a great presentation on some really interesting birds. So we really appreciate you having you this evening. And I hope to
absolutely. Thank
see
you so much for having me.
everybody. Yeah, absolutely. I hope to see everybody in person at our next meeting, which is going to be April 18th, at our office in Hyde Park. So thank you all very much and have a wonderful evening.
Yeah, thanks. This was great.
Yes.